This is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another in-depth deck overview. This time, the final of the trio of the Cascade decks, the Glimpse combo. As a friendly reminder, if you like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, and let me know what deck you might like to see us cover next. So Glimpse combo is the final of the Cascade decks that we have yet to cover, and they utilize the cards Shardless Agent and Violent Outburst to cascade into a spell that costs less than 3 mana. The only card in their deck that costs less than 3 mana is Glimpse of Tomorrow, which says, shuffle all permanents you own in your library, then reveal that many cards on the top of your library, put all non-aura permanents revealed this way on the battlefield, then do the same for aura cards and put the rest on the bottom in any order. Basically, for however many permanents you have, you shuffle everything into your deck and then reveal the top number of cards. So if you have 10 permanents in play, you reveal 10 permanents and then everything goes on the battlefield. Now this deck is interesting in what it's trying to accomplish. It's very unique of the 3 Cascade decks, as it is the more higher variance of the 3. Rhinos, obviously, you get 3 copies of Rhino, or 2 copies of Rhinos. With Living End, you get whatever happens to be in your graveyard that you happen to cycle. With this deck, it's kind of a high risk, high reward. Now, some of the newer versions that we'll talk about in a bit tended to go for a little bit more conservative with an elemental package that's a little bit more normal and kind of trying to win with Omnath. This version is a little bit more akin to what the deck was when it first appeared. That is more of an all-in combo deck. It tries to cascade into powerful things like Omniscience to be able to cast everything in your hand, or get things like Jenga Taxius to draw a bunch of cards. Get a Gristlebrand, another way to draw a bunch of cards. Iona to kind of shut your opponent's deck down if they're vulnerable to that. Put an Emrakul into play for free, etc. And then, in order to facilitate, and also has Terror of the Peaks. So this is a dragon that whenever each creature comes into play, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to the creature's power to any target. So if all the creatures are coming to play, they all see each other and do a bunch of damage to everything. So this is one way to combo out to win the game. In addition to that, deck also plays copies of Goblin Dark Dwellers. That way, if you have a Glimpse in your graveyard, then you can use Goblin Dark Dwellers once the spell is done resolving to cast another copy of it and kind of go again from there. And like I said, this is kind of the high upside version of the deck. Other cards that go along with the deck are Wave Sifter, which you can evoke to put 2 clue tokens on the battlefield. This increases the number of permanents you have on the battlefield. Colony Garden in the land base does very much the same thing. Allows you to get 2 permanents for 1 land, though it does come into play tapped, which can be a little bit awkward. And then the rest of the mana base is just what you'd expect, except for 1 copy of Beseju that's not in there for some reason. But you have a couple copies of Otawaru, and then you have a copy of Gemstone Caverns to be able to go faster when you're on the draw. This version has a little bit more room to run some of its sideboard cards in the main deck. Runs a couple copies of Leyline of Sanctity to keep your opponent from discard spelling you or burning you out. Force of Vigor to answer any main deck hate cards your opponent might have, while also being a card that would normally be in your sideboard. As far as the sideboard itself, you have Obsidian Charm Moss for things like Tron and Amulet. You have the additional copies of Leyline of Sanctity for any type of discard or burn nonsense. You have 2 copies of Leyline in the Void for any type of graveyard decks like Living End primarily, but also Reanimator. Ricochet Trap as an additional anti-counterspell measure, along with Force of Will and Mystical Dispute. Foundation Breaker to blow up any hate cards like Chalice of the Void or Voidmere. And then finally a copy of Gemstone Caverns. Now this version is very high risk, high reward, and a lot of the versions these days have settled for kind of a decent plan B with elemental packages. This one's kind of a good example of the elemental package while also being an 80 card Yorion deck. So with Yorion, you would normally get punished for only being able to run 8 copies of your Outburst effects, but you also get to add 4 copies of Ardent Plea, so you get to run 12 cascading effects, so you really don't dilute the deck all that much. Then you get to play things like Teferi Time Raveler in larger numbers than we saw in the last version. You get to play Endurance, you get to play Fury and Solitude, and in addition to that, you also get to play the card Risen Reef, so you have this decent backup plan. Although, once again, you do have this kind of slow, mopey start where you only really start casting things on turn 3. And then Fable the Mirror to kind of cycle through your deck and put more bodies into play, playing into your Glimpse plan a lot better. And then the center of this deck is Omnath. Basically what this deck tries to do is get a bunch of permanents into play, and then flip a Omnath and a bunch of lands into play, and then do it again, kind of burn your opponent out from there, or just getting an overwhelming board presence from having a bunch of elementals in play and kind of killing your opponent from there. But as far as combo turns, what it's trying to do is cast multiple copies of Glimpse of Tomorrow in the same turn, flip an Omnath in play, and just kind of dome your opponent out that way. This often can be a one-turn kill. And then, you are running the 4-color mana base, and you're also running copy of Caverns of Souls. This is kind of like basically 4-color elementals meets Glimpse combo, and that's what this deck is kind of do. And even Wave Sifter, even though it is still there to set up multiple permanents and play with some Evoke Investigate ability, still is a elemental that you can cast in the mid to late game. Sideboard, you're going to see a lot of the same cards. Mystical Dispute to protect your combo from counter spells. Dead Gone, give you a little bit of early interaction against Ragavans and decks like Burn and Humans. Foundation Breaker for any type of hate cards you might run into, once again, Chalice of the Void, Void Mirror, etc. Subtlety for any type of Planeswalker nonsense you might be aware of, mainly Teferi Time Raveler being a problematic thing, but this is also fits quite nicely with your thing. And, if Endurance doesn't have to be very good in the matchup, often Subtlety will be. And then, once again, you are a Yorion Pie. Another example, very same deck, but a little bit different, a little bit trimmed on what it's doing. Blazing Season Pyromancer instead of Fable the Mirror Breaker, but you're still running the 8 copies of the Cascade effects, but you're still running the Risen Reef Omnath Wave Sifter combo, and you also get to play Fury. You could easily play Solitude, although this is mainly eschewing the 4th color other than some amount of sideboard cards. So the mana base probably a little bit better. You're a little bit more trim, but you don't have as many cascaded things, so your ratio might be a little bit off. But, still overall, you're still running a solid elemental game plan. Sideboard, one new card to the pile is a Bone Crusher Giant, which has proven to be quite a nice mid-range card, being able to kill small creatures, being a 4/3 body behind that you can also beat down with and damages your opponent whenever they get removed from the battlefield. And finally, we have the deck that's kind of the hybridization of the 2 different variants, and that being mainly all in on the Omnath killing you combo, but playing Chancellor of the Tangle as a way to get additional permanents in the battlefield whenever it enters the battlefield. It's also playing the Goblin Dark Dwellers. This is more like the first version, except it happens to be running Omnath as its main win con, so you're not running as many running into as many issues with having uncastable Emrakuls or Ionas in your hand, but at the same time you still get this explosive combo. Glimpse, go at it again with Goblin Dark Dwellers, Glimpse, and cast it again with another Dark Dwellers, kind of trying to combo out your opponent in one turn, and still can leave an overwhelming board presence behind. As far as different cards, you'll see Brazen Borrower, definitely another way to deal with hate cards as well as just problematic permanents from your opponent. Force of Negation, another way to protect your combo, especially when you're going off with Violent Outburst. Force of Vigor and Foundation Breaker, we've already kind of discussed, as the anti-hate card measures. Endurance is good against the graveyard nonsense, especially as a Murktide and Living End. And then Furies whenever you need to actually play a relevant game of Magic. So what are the pluses and minuses of this versus the 4-color Living End or 3-color Rhinos decks? This deck has a lot of the same issues, but it's not running as much interaction as those decks, especially the Rhinos version. So you're a little bit more of an all-in combo deck than those decks are. So you're more likely to kill on your key combo turn, as opposed to just putting 2/4 for Rhinos into play or just having to untap and kill your opponent with Living End. The downside of this version is a little bit more inconsistent. You're a little bit more vulnerable to not finding your particular pieces to go off. So if you do run into problems where you're up against a fast deck and they have some type of disruption, like say Grixis Death Shadow or something, you're going to have a lot of problems as they get to go Thoughtseize your Cascader, and then if you don't draw another Cascader on the next 2 or 3 turns, they just get to kind of tempo you out with all their different things. So this deck has more upside than Rhinos, but it's a little bit more inconsistent because you don't have a decent backup plan B until like turn 3 or 4. That said, Risen Reef and Omnath is a very powerful thing, and you can start hard casting your things with your Omnath, getting the landfall triggers, getting you extra mana. So this deck does have a decent plan B, but it does kick in a little bit slower. So you're kind of this hybridization of 4-color elementals and a Glimpse combo, so you kind of get a combo finish along with being a powerful 4-color deck. So as far as how good this version is, it still remains to be seen. It doesn't see a ton of results, although it has put up some results lately since it's started to focus more on the elemental version. But it is something you need to be aware of, especially as most of the time it's now kind of this hybridization of kind of 2 of the top tier decks in the format being 4-color elementals and the Cascade combo decks. So, this is a deck with a lot of potential, but has yet to put up a number of significant results, although it has done well from time to time and is a deck you should be aware of. As always, if you like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as far as hate cards, I've already kind of mentioned them before I go into my wrap-up spiel. Mainly, you want to worry about Chalice of the Void, Void Mirror. You know, you can be a little bit vulnerable to things like Blood Moon because you are a 3 or 4 color mana base, but you do have ways to fetch around and play. You know, so you need to be aware of those cards. That's why you see the Foundation Breakers and the Force of Vigors in the sideboard, or the Brazen Borrowers. You do have this alternative plan B, which is a little bit better than Living Ends, a little bit worse than Team of Rhinos, you know, as far as being able to play a tempo game. So, you know, the deck is kind of in this weird hybridization, and I really don't have enough experience with it to know how good it is. I've played it against it a few times, but I'm more likely to run into Rhinos or Living End to be able to give you an honest opinion of that. But, you know, you need to be aware of how this deck functions and how it works and how it functions in the meta. That's it. Hope to see you for the next video. This has been John for MTG Nexus.